Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the second webinar that we have to introduce you to Myon. What we're going to cover in today's short session is we're going to think a little bit more about how you would begin to use Myon in the classroom, because we've got our students familiar with how to find their recommended books and also browse on a topic, but we want to go that step further and really link it in with all of the subjects which we are teaching. And I'm also going to introduce you to something called Myon Projects, which is a way in which you can set work for your students to really go that step further and really enhance their learning experience. Now, with today's session, we're going to be spending the majority of the time actually in the site itself, because I want to make this a little bit more interactive and show you what everything looks like live. So if you can just bear with me 1 second, just so I can get the Myon webpage open, and you should be able to see that we have got the login screen open again. So I am just going to log in as the same student that we used earlier. Now, when you are using Myon in the classroom, you have a few different options depending on the amount of technology that you have in school. A really nice thing to be able to do is for you as a teacher to have the book on something like an interactive whiteboard, because you then have a large copy of that text and you can start to go through and really ask questions with your students. Another way that you can do it if you have enough technology is the teacher yourselves has that book on the interactive whiteboard or the screen, and you can actually get all of your students to log in and follow along with that book. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you ways that the students can interact with the books in a moment, but what can actually be really nice if they're all following along is you can get them to make notes, and this is something that you can then view and feedback on at a later date. So I'm just going to go in and open a book. Okay. Now again, we have the audio that can be used. Now, the advantage of the audio in the sense of using it in different subjects is you might have teachers in, say, history or geography or science who feel less comfortable with their potential level of English as they're teaching the students. So actually the fact that they can still use the audio, still have that standardized pronunciation, allows them to not have those worries. They don't actually have to read the book aloud. Myon and the system will do that for them. So I'm going to start this book.
Snack Time for Cow by Michael Dahl. Illustrated by Oriol Vidal. Baby cow likes to snack. In the morning, baby cow asks, "What's for snack?"
Now, the reason I let that audio play there is you'll notice that, again, the advantage of having the voice actors that have recorded these books is not only do you have that standardized pronunciation, you have the intonation, you're also adding to the whole experience with these books, because they're actually going to hear slightly different voices when we have the speech marks and the natural speech in the book as well. Now, thinking of this a little bit as a classroom experience, this is always a really nice point where you can pause and start asking your children about the book that they have in front of them. A good way to get them to practice their speaking in English as well. So, for example here, we might be able to start asking the children, who on the page, if we use the image as well, do we think is the baby cow? In this case, we know that this one is the baby cow because we know that this cow is a little bit smaller than the other one. But it allows your students to start thinking about these kind of questions. Again, we might want to start asking questions like, if this is a baby cow, who do we think the other cow on the screen is? And again, we've used a very simple book to start thinking about that family language, because we might start to think, oh, it could be the adult cow, it could be the mum, it could be the dad, for example. Okay. Now, with all of these books, we actually have tools that allow us to then go that step further and begin to annotate the books. Just over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, you have a couple of different ways in which you could do this. If we just have the one copy up on the screen, you as the teacher has responsibility for those annotations, which is probably the best way to approach it with the really young year groups. But for the older year groups, you can also get them to be following along, and you can ask them to do their own annotations in the book, because of course they're all going to have slightly different approaches. So one of the annotating tools that we have is we have a shape tool, which is a really nice way that we can get the students to interact with both the image and the text. So the example that we gave there was asking who we thought the baby cow was. And actually, what we could do is we could click onto our arrow shape. We can control the colour at the bottom. So, for example, I'm not going to use yellow because my background page is yellow. I'm going to change it to, say, purple, for example. But what I could then do is I can think, okay, I can see that I have baby cow in the text itself, and I can see that I have an image that links in with that. That's a really nice way that I have started to learn those words. Again, gets me thinking a little bit more about animals. Now, we might start to ask the students at this point, oh, what do we mean by the idea of snack? What is that going to link in with? Now, this is something that can get them thinking, but if we go through and the student thinks, I don't know that word, I'm not really sure of that word, what they can do and what we can do as a teacher is we can actually click onto that word and we can view it in the dictionary. So we now get that extra level of definition. So here we can see that a snack is, for example, a small amount of food that's eaten between meals.
Snack.
And I can also have it pronounced for me as well. And actually, we could now start to get the students thinking, what might you like to have for a snack? What kind of food would you really like to enjoy? And it could be that actually we get them thinking that what the rest of the book is going to be about, and we start predicting. Of course, if this was a non-fiction text, it could be that we start looking at, do they know the key terminology that's going to link in with the topic, for example. So we've now turned the page. We now have an example of all of the different food that we have available to us. So if I go back to the tools, we might now start asking the students questions such as, looking at everything that we have on the page there, which of those words are food items? And what I could use here is I have a highlighting tool, which allows me to go through and to highlight the words that are important. So I could say, well, I know that banana is a food, as well as pear, as well as cheese as well. And we now know Answers Mama Cow has also given us a little bit of context into who the previous image was as well. And this is quite a fun thing for you to be doing and joining in with the students, but also if they have their own copies of the books, when you log in as a teacher, you can see all of their versions of these books. So you are able very quickly to see if you've got students that maybe aren't understanding everything that you're talking about with them. We also have a paintbrush tool as well, which allows students to draw a little bit freehand too. So it could be, we've talked about the food over here, maybe I want to draw around the food. So I have my banana, I have my pear, and I also have my cheese as well. And already you can see how we're starting to get the students to really think about what we have. And actually, even with a relatively straightforward book, we're starting to introduce quite a lot of different topics to that child. Maybe let's get them thinking, or what else could we have for a snack? What might be next, for example? So next page, we've got in the afternoon, Baby Cow asks, what's for snack? And another tool that you can have, which again, for younger students, you might want to do together, but for older students who are moving further forward and want to start thinking about their writing, we have a sticky notes tool that allows them to leave a post-it note in the book. So I am going to drop my pin on the page, and I now have a post-it note. Again, I have control of the colour if I want to change this, but you as the teacher might have asked me, what do you think that Baby Cow is going to have for his next snack? I might think, oh, he could have a pizza, he might have chips, lots of different things, but it gets the students thinking and actually gets them to work on their writing a little bit more. Now, something that's really nice with the post-it notes is when we click on the 3 lines, we actually have different symbols to go alongside this. So when we start going through projects a little bit later on in the session, and you can start setting books for students to do independently, you can get them to use these symbols as well. So it could be that the student has gone through the book and actually thinks, I've now got a question for my teacher, so I'm going to use the question mark symbol. Or maybe I've found out something that I didn't know, so I'm going to use the shocked face. Or maybe I really love this part, or I found out something that I really enjoyed, so I'm going to use the love heart symbol. Just another way that they're going that step further and really honing in on those language learning skills. Now, for students that are even further ahead with their English, something that's really nice to use is the journal. Now, all of the tools that I've just shown you are specific to that individual book, and it's their own individual copy of the book, so it's different for everybody. The journal is something that they can actually take with them from book to book, so they can have across their entire MyOn journey. So it could be that they always want to record notes on all of the animal books that they've read. Now, when I click onto journal, again, over on the right-hand side, it comes up with the unentitled notes section. If I ever want to add in a brand new journal entry, I can do just by clicking the plus symbol. Okay. Now, a good way to use this journal section, particularly in terms of the language learners, is a way for them to record all of the new vocabulary that they've learned from this book. They've either learned through you as a teacher, they've learned through the dictionary, or they've used that pronunciation tool over and over again, so they really feel confident with it. So, for example, it could be new words, and today I have learnt the word snack, I might have learnt the word cow, and I might have learnt the word cheese. And I can take this from book to book to book, and I can keep building a bank of new words or even new facts that I have learnt. And it's a good way for, again, those older students to really start thinking a little bit more about their writing skills. Now, there's a little bit more that you can do in terms of the tools when you're slightly further ahead, but this is a really good way to launch it, and also it's a really good way to get those students thinking, and you can see how you can use it in that classroom experience. Now, I'm going to move away from what the student can see. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log in as a teacher, because I want to start introducing you to the idea of projects, which is where you can start setting things like books and reading lists for your students to complete in their own time. So I'm just going to log in as a teacher again. Okay. And again, you'll see from a teacher's perspective, they also have the library and access to all of the books. Now, a really good way to start putting together lists of books that you would like your students to read is by using the My List feature. So, to do this, first of all, we're going to go in and we are going to search for books. Now, let's say, for example, that I know that the next topic that I want to cover with my students is space, for example, because this is something I know that is going to be covered in science, and I really want them to feel quite comfortable with these facts, and also I would like them to feel comfortable in delivering this information in English. So I'm going to type in space and search for all of the books that are available. As with the students, I can come in and refine it down based on their Lexile level and based on their grade level. Now, if I hover over the books, again, the same as the students, I can read the book, I can get the information about the book, but also I can add it to my list. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to add a couple of books to do with space just to my list. Of course, I am just selecting random books at this point, but if you were going through this as a teacher, you can of course go through that book, check that it's suitable, check that it's something that you actually want to use with your students. Now, everything that I've added to my list, which is something that I have favorited and something that I can come back to at a later stage, is now under this My List section. Now, when I click and add a book to my list, what it will do initially is it will add these books to something called my default bundle. This is just everything that I've added, books that I maybe want to come back to. If I want to make this really specific, because actually I've added lots of different topics at once, what I can do is I can actually then add a bundle at the bottom. So this is now going to be very specific to what I want to be teaching, for example. So I'm going to add a bundle and I'm going to call it space, for example, just by typing the word in and then by clicking the plus symbol. Now I've added those space books to my list and I now want to add them to my space bundle. So the way that I would do that is I would select the book and then just drag it into the space bundle. And you can see I can do that for all of the books, maybe just select a couple of the books. And this is something that I could keep coming back to and keep adding to until I was happy with everything that I had added in this area. If I now click on space, you can see that I have the 6 books that I've added, and there's 6 books that I think are really important for my students. I think they're going to be able to access them all. I think they're going to tie in with what I'm going to be teaching them in the classroom. What I'm now able to do with these books, if I click on to my settings symbol, which is just the little cog up here, is I can share these with my students, which would mean they would go into their recommended area. So I'm saying that these are books that maybe I would like them to read. Or if we want to go that step further and get our students to actually work on these books for homework, what I can do is I can click onto copy to project. Now, what you can do when you've copied these is you could add them to something that you've potentially created before, or what you'll most likely be doing in these very early projects is you will be starting a brand new project, because this is something that we're going to use as a starting point and a basis for homework with our students, for example. So I am going to start a new project and I am going to call this Space Grade 3, for example, and save. Okay. Now, that has gone into my project section of my user account. So the way that I access that is by clicking on to Classroom and then clicking into Projects. Now, this is a demo account, so it won't quite look like this when you log in for the very first time. But under My Projects, it's broken down into active projects, so things that I have physically set for my students, and also inactive projects. These are inactive because I haven't gone in and really done anything with them or assigned them to my students. Now I've scrolled down to the bottom and you can see here is my Space Grade 3 that we've just created by adding a series of books that we felt was important that our students are accessing. We can just go in and assign that to students, but what you'll probably want to do first is come in and just edit it, for example. And the only reason I would edit it is just to give your students a few more instructions at this stage, okay? Now, you can add a due date on this, which is useful if you're setting it for homework, for example. So it could be that we would like our students to read these books on Space before we have our lesson next week, just to give them a brief introduction. So I'm going to set next week's date, for example. Okay. What I can then also do is I might teach one class in grade 3, but I might have a colleague that is also teaching grade 3 who I think also would like to use this science project that I'm creating. So what I can do is I can actually mark it as shared, which then means that my colleagues can use this project too. So it just allows you to save on the work and the planning that you're doing on an individual basis. Okay. Now, something else that's quite nice to set for your students is the project objective. This is just a way that you can give instructions to your students. So we've been through and we've looked at all of those tools that students have available. We know that they have sticky notes that they can use to record maybe questions that you've asked them. We know that they can highlight words. We know that they can use the shapes to draw arrows. And we know that they can record key information in their journal. So if you want your students to do something very specific, this is where you can use this project objective. So it could be that our objective is to read 3 books from the list and record in your journal key facts about space. Okay. And I'm then going to save it as a shared project so my colleagues can find it, and I'm then saved it with the instructions as well. So it's still inactive, and it's inactive because I haven't assigned it to any students yet. But all I would then do is click onto the assign button at the bottom, and I can then come in and select my class that I teach and assign it to my entire group by clicking the tick box at the top of the screen. However, if I only wanted to assign it to maybe one student in the class or 1 or 2 who had a particular need, I can also do that by just ticking next to individual names and then clicking apply. Now I have assigned this to students. You'll notice it will have appeared in my active projects under space. This is now going to be accessible for my students as soon as they log in. So we're going to log in as a student in a second, just so you can see what it looks like for them. But the only other thing that we want to introduce you to about projects at this very early stage of using MyOM is the fact that you can access projects via the cloud. So with that space project we just created, we shared it so that potentially our colleagues can see it, but also by accessing the cloud, not only can you see projects that have been shared by your colleagues, you can see projects that have been created by the wider MyOM community, so everybody that uses MyOM internationally. The advantage of using the shared feature is, again, to help you with your planning, because if you are teaching a particular project, a particular topic like space, like the solar system, it's always worth checking if somebody else has done that work for you. So again, what you can do is you can search at the top. So I'm going to use space as the example. And you can search to see if it's been shared by anybody else that's just in your school, or it's been shared by everybody on MyOM. And I'm just going to click search, let's see if that works. So apologies, it's just running a little bit slowly. And then what we can see is we can see everything that has been shared to do with that particular topic. And again, it's just about being time saving for you as teachers. And what you're able to do is you can see the name of a topic. So here, for example, I can see that this one's been called Second Grade Science and Social Studies. I can see that it includes books about stars, sun and moon, space, government and distribution of power. That could be something that I am teaching. So if I want to look at this, I can use the I symbol. I can then have a slightly closer look, decide if this is something that I think I would like to use, copy to my own project, decide if I want to make any edits, and then just save. And in the same way, it's appeared under my inactive projects because I just need to assign it to a student in the same way that we did with the one that we created ourselves. And it's now under my active projects. At this stage of using Myon, just setting your students a set of books to go through is a really great way to use this projects tool. And you can use the cloud just to see if somebody else has created something for you as a starting point. But when your students log in, so I'm just going to log in as our demo student that we created. What you'll see is the projects are available for them from their home screen. So it's something that they have access to instantly. So, for example, there's the Space Grade 3 that we created from the bundle. So if I want to come in and look at this, I can use my pencil symbol and I can see here that my teacher wants me to read 3 books from the list and record in my Myon journal all the key facts about space. So very clear for me and also gives me a very direct list of books to use. So for some students, again, this could be a slightly better way to launch Myon with them than using the recommended books, but it allows you to tie it in to that classroom experience. Now, that is everything that we have to cover today, but after watching the 2 webinars that have now been sent out to you, you should have everything that you need to launch Myon and also really tie it in to your classroom teaching.